Welcome once again to Syntax Error, your pretentious philosophical pedantic podcast ostensibly about video gaming and related topics therein. Warning, this podcast contains mature language, content, and spoilers. You have been warned.
There will come soft rains in the smell of ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, and frogs in the pools singing at night, and wild plum trees in tremulous white. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire, and not one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it is done. Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly, and spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we are gone. That is, There Will Come Soft Rains by Sarah Teasdale. So I'm Jonathan Neuromancer, and welcome to a brief history of the end of days, where we'll be discussing tonight technological horrors that will wipe us off the face of this planet. I'm here with Scott Thurlow.
Hello.
Stephen Ramosi.
How are you?
Beth Morgan.
Hello.
And Christopher Morgan.
Good evening.
So, let's hop right in. Does anyone want to share their favorite human death wish, I guess?
What do you mean by that?
Well,
my favorite one in regards to AI?
In regards to whatever technological feat that we're achieving that will lead us to our imminent doom. Scott?
See, my favorite one, so this was a hard thing to plan out for, or at least say my favorite one. The one that I remember most fondly, most recently, maybe we can discuss this, I don't know if it actually counts, but we mentioned this game a couple other syntax errors. Deus Ex, I think, counts as a technological apocalypse, but not in the AI way. It's more like, it's not like they're self-aware, but we're still destroying, like, we create a new culture war over technology, which I think is interesting. And ZP has put it this way: would you rather be on the side of people with, like, ocean pistons for forearms, or the normal people? I know what side I'm going to choose.
Speaking of self-aware, in the news, I think this week, actually, was, I don't know how true this is or not, or how rigorously it's been tested, but I saw an article about the first robot that's self-aware, or the first, I guess, artificial intelligence that's self-aware, was just tested. So we got that going for us right now. Skynet, basically. We'll see you guys.
That's probably
this isn't even gonna air. We'll all be dead by the time we get this edited.
Speaking of that, actually, I'll answer the actual question. You just mentioned it. Skynet, probably. Terminator 2 is like the best one if I really had to choose one.
Do I have to choose one from fiction?
No, it can be either, like, whatever kind of idea of, like, technology that we use and how it will progress to destroy us, because we like to bring fear to people.
I prefer to be taken out by the AI apocalypse, because that's the one I'm most curious about. So if I have to live through one and then die, that would be the one I choose. Right. Although I might choose the other side and side with the AIs and then live.
Be an AI? Yes.
I also just read something or just some quote that somebody wrote that was like, listen, if we get taken out by our AI apocalypse, then we're the worst parents ever.
Yeah, it's probably true. We are the worst parents ever.
It would be our fault,
yeah.
Because we wouldn't have taught them correctly.
Well, that's also, that exact one is the theme of Blade Runner, Battlestar Galactica, to a certain degree, 2001.
And the Mass Effect Geth story.
The Mass Effect Geth story.
It's
about creating, it even goes to not science. Sure. To Skynet, where you're creating a life, but you don't realize what you're creating. And even in iRobot, we were talking about before, like the 3 laws. Well, those 3 laws are great, but they don't work in every situation. There's a short-sighted aspect to it. So to be a parent in AI, and I think this is kind of a variation of what everybody's saying, or a culmination of what everybody's saying, if you're going to be a parent to AI, you've got to think of every single variable. Because it's not going to be like your little kid coming back with a bloody nose. It's going to launch a nuclear war or something.
Yeah, sure.
Has anyone else seen this new show, Humans?
No, I haven't seen it.
Chris and I just recently discovered it and been watching it, and it's a total example of if you create AI and then treat them like slaves, of course they're going to rise up against you.
Yes.
It's what Chris and I always talk about. Don't mess with the psychic children, and then they won't come and screw you over at the end. Yeah. You don't mess with the super powerful AI, and then they won't take you over and kill you horribly.
But before we delve too much into, like, a specific type of technological apocalypse, I like to go around, continue around the room. But I'll go first and then Chris. Okay. I like the banality of evil. Even though it's great to have this, like, idea that we'll create life and then it'll destroy us, or like nuclear warheads, or the concept that we are right now using what technology we have to make the Earth inhabitable, just not out of just out of sheer incompetence in a way.
Yes, I agree with that.
And greed. That's kind of a.
Well, you say we're bumbling into the future.
Yeah, it's not some grand gesture. It's just slowly bumbling our way towards our extinction. And that to me is a much more fitting example of for the human race than any epic cataclysmic ending. So
it's definitely the more realistic.
It seemed like a good idea at the time.
So, sure. Chris, would you like to share your favorite type of apocalypse?
I think I'm going to merge the two. Because I was listening to what you're saying, I'm like, wow, that's really more scary, because Michio Kaku a couple months ago said that basically the person we've evolved to today because of technology would never have been able to live, a couple thousand years ago, because we've become so dependent on things. But what I was, and I guess that kind of goes part and parcel with like the internet, because if I don't know if anybody's seen Terminator 3, but I'm going to spoil it. It's,
you bastard!
No one's seen it.
Cares?
No, it's.
I've seen it.
You know what? I'm sending a Terminator back to assassinate you. So
I
you don't
have
have to hear
seen it.
this.
And it was terrible.
Go
Oh,
on.
no, it had the best fucking ending since the first one. Because the reason they couldn't stop Skynet, in the spoilers, is because that Skynet used the internet. It was no longer
Localized.
a mainframe, and it was like all over the place.
You
And
couldn't just shut it down.
yeah. So if there is AI, the fact that we've got, the internet and cyberspace and so forth, it'll be Age of Ultron. It will be there before we know it'll be there informing its next plan before we even get a hint that it's there.
I just thought of another one. I just want to Lawnmower Man, maybe up there in one of my favorite ones. It's it's sort of like it's somewhat of a segue to what Chris said. A man becomes god of cyberspace and therefore controls everything. And his birth cry, of course, will be the sound of every phone on Earth ringing in unison. And that's the end of that movie.
That's my fucking nightmare.
Yeah, well, that's a good one. I think that's one of. I might be up there in my favorite ones to keep entering, to name some more.
Okay, so what do you guys want to talk about first? There are so many different technological apocalypses. Although before we get in, I kind of like the idea of why we fear technology, because it kind of goes back to, in the sense, like what was in the forest back in the day. Like a lot of our horror happened in nature because it was the unknown. And we've kind of conquered the world in a sense of that we're no longer afraid of what lies in the darkness we can't see. So now we look towards the future. And I think there's a reaction to the fact that technology is
outpacing us.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't. But that's the thing is, I wouldn't say it's outpacing
See what you
us.
mean, though, but...
It's outpacing some of us, and those that get left behind. I can say my parent. My father, can't keep up. He does a fair job of it, but he really can't keep up as well as I can, or as well as the next generation can. So we fear that not only being left behind, but
the pace of progress, perhaps.
It's all those same fears of unknown. Where's it going? And thus we look to the extremes of things. So I like that aspect of that the darkness we don't know, the darkness of our future. I guess since we're already talking about AI, do you guys want to start with that? Like really explore that?
Because I think they all. I don't think anything's mutually exclusive, technology to AI, because AI is if general technology is here about where we are, AI is the other side of that equation. And it's the end of evolution. This is the primordial proteins that formed man now. And I think why, to your point, why technology scares us and that we look to the future is because since the Industrial Revolution, more and more we create it without thinking about what we have.
Sure, of course.
And, if you listen to the scientists from the Manhattan Project, once they, they knew what they were creating, but by the same time they hated themselves for what they did. And I think that the thing about, technology is we're all, we've all come dependent on it. I mean, I think about things when I was... 20 years ago, and I have in my memory now that I had a cell phone. I'm like, I didn't have a cell phone until 99. I mean, so we've become so dependent on it, and it's magic. Nobody really ever thinks about how stuff works. The Arthur C.
Clarke thing, of course.
Yeah,
but I just want to say something broadly, like something you said, sort of like bumbling, like all goes back to everything you both said. We're like bumbling away into it without quite knowing what we're doing. It's sort of like the modern day Frankenstein's monster, of course. We're creating something that we're not sure when it's fully unleashed, we have no idea the consequences until that point.
It reminds me of a comic I once saw. I believe it was George Carlin, but I'm going to say it's George Carlin because that's not an insult to anyone, in case it's not him. But it's like science does what we can do, not what we should do. So, I just made AIDS airborne and contagious. You're welcome.
Let's weaponize smallpox.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, again, there is that fear to it as well. Right. That, to your point, Chris, that we just keep moving along without regard to what we have. So, but again, there are people who can keep up with it. And
that's a fair point.
So my kind of question, I guess I'm going to pose to you is, why is AI a negative thing? Like, why do people fear it? Why do they always assume the worst about it?
I don't, personally.
I know not always.
It doesn't have to be. I think, I don't know one way or the other. If it ever happens, it could go one way or the other. I can't predict that. I don't necessarily think it has to be a bad thing. As I was saying before, if you don't do it right, it can be a terrible thing. If you make it too human or not human enough, it can have horrible consequences. Like, I was just reading today, they are teaching some sort of customer service AI in New Zealand anger, so they can deal with irate customers.
Awesome. There you go.
And there are people like, oh my god, how you're teaching computers to be angry at us, and that's going to be like the start of the horribleness, and they're going to come back. I always find the fear of AI, I understand it on some level, but I also find it to be reactionary.
To your point, I found it interesting you said either too not human enough or
too human.
Too human, but
which is a terrible game, by the way. Nobody played that game.
What is the line? Because what is that kind of idea of what AI should be? Do we model it after any singular person with the traits we like best about humans, or do we? In
2001, that HAL computer, he gets confused kind of because he's told that he has to keep a secret, but he has to also
he can't reveal the true nature of the mission, but he has to help his mission as much as he can.
But
right?
He can't reveal
he sort of feels like it's better, or the way he thinks I can kill people and that's better than letting them know the secret.
Right, it's the overriding thing.
So he wasn't taught like the right sort of priorities, if you look at it that way. There was this book, this series by Robert J. Sawyer, who's a great author, and I recommend him. And the series was WWW, and it was about the World Wide Web. Well, one of the main themes was the World Wide Web kind of becomes sentient and wakes up for various reasons. And there's this sort of company, like a non-profit company that exists at that time, who, because of the movie 2001 and what went wrong with HAL, has created a database to teach an AI who kind of emerges the rules and what should come first and what should come second. Like, human life should come first, and if you're told to keep a secret, it's better to let the secret go than to kill someone. Right. So it's trying to prioritize and like teach him all the information this emerging AI might need. And I just found that so fascinating because, like, someone should do that, because if something wakes up by mistake, you'd want it to know certain things about the way the world works and about the way people work, because we can't necessarily be trusted.
Can't trust ourselves. I agree with that.
Right.
Explain how things work, or to do it in a timely manner.
And Asimov saw that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he saw that because I was going to say because I'm working my way through iRobot, and the thing is, AI is friendly and there's a cut and dry 3 rules, but as you go along, you're finding that they didn't plan for every consequence, which is how we get to HAL, which is how we get to the book. And it's funny because you had asked why we view technology as evil, and I don't think we do, but authors and artists, for dramatic purposes, create these stories. But if you look at the authors and the scientists, they actually think about the implications. We were talking about how technology.
Well, some do.
Well, no, hold on a second. Because we talk about how technology marches on and nobody asks why or how or if we should. It's like the people who are able to stand back from it and see the wider implications of it. So I don't think it's a negative thing. I just think that to create stories and, cautionary tales, to your point, not only should they be teaching them, they should have them read the iRobot series. I mean, the people who do this, I mean, if they pay attention to 2001 and the iRobot series, we'll be okay.
Well, it's an old XKCD joke, by the way, when he was like, he's writing code, he's like, and also, in case do not become Skynet. He builds it into the code. Go on.
To your internet point, if the internet became sentient, it would destroy humanity. From just the sheer reading all the comment sections
Yes.
of the entire world.
So number 2 rules,
And
don't
all of
read
the terrible porns that we have.
Don't read
Porn
comment
and cats.
sections.
That was
It's the anger bomb. It's just like,
Yes.
We get so frustrated.
It's like those Google searches and so forth where they keep all your information. They hack the NSA and they know what scares you on the internet. So they
It was a
inundate
fascinating
you.
series, though. I highly recommend it. It was about like emerging consciousness, not just AI, but also like biological.
Sure.
And to your point, Chris, when you said that it's authors writing narratives more than I don't think it would be effective narrative unless there was a consciousness within society that were attracted to the idea that technology is bad.
That it taps into like a
Yes.
a zeitgeist.
They wouldn't write it if it didn't appeal.
Sorry, that's the other thing. You have to remember that when you're writing a book, you have to have like conflict. It can't just be like, all right, so this AI is fine, dandy,
Right.
like the entire time.
And all our lives were saved at the end.
Like, if there is a AI that learns, it's going to learn a shitload faster than humans, first of all. It's going to be beyond our morality pretty quickly, I would say. So the only thing that we have protecting us is if it sees us as useful, A, or B, has something built into its programming that protects us.
But it's gonna think like a machine. When you were saying that, I kept thinking of Ash from Alien. It's just like where he admires the alien because it's unfettered by remorse. I mean, it's just like if you have something that can take all of our emotional responses and why we do things based on an emotional context or caveats we make in programming or whatever, it's going to be looking at those things logically without the emotion. So even if we like pick up every contingency, we have to kind of like think logically as opposed to emotionally.
Sure.
Right.
Well, all right. Let me. I'm bring up something. I think we're all familiar, with Ray Kurzweil, yes, and his concept of singularity.
Yeah.
Sorry, but I mean, it has to be mentioned.
Yeah.
That's what you're probably going to say. You obviously were, but I mean, that's the whole thing. It goes back. In fact, it just goes back to a first episode of BHED, where why is it so appealing? Because it's an unknown thing. We have no idea what's going to happen. So it becomes. Then that becomes a scary thing because it's a modern unknown, if you will.
But the point of singularity that I was going to bring up was that we always assume that AI and ourselves are two different things, when we seem to be going to the point when we are going to be so enmeshed with technology that there's going to be no
there is no
difference between
separation.
us and
Yes.
technology.
Yes.
Right.
So,
Sure.
I see that as probably more likely than a full-on AI just destroys the human race. Like,
how many of us are attached to our smartphones?
or
So
Wearing a
like,
watch,
that's-
wearing glasses, man. Like that's
seriously.
you're a primitive cyborg.
there's already body modification stuff that you
Yeah,
can do
and
and
that
have
too.
like things built in
Limb
your arm and
replacements and
like
so
yeah.
And
Yeah.
prosthetics are
I mean,
developing
not-
at a
That's what I'm saying.
I'm talking about
crazy
like
rate.
I'm talking about like things that people use as like jewelry. Like people have things implanted into their hands,
Yeah.
Sure.
you know,
yes, that's true.
that give off signals and like to their phones
Yeah,
or whatever,
sure.
stuff
All
like
that.
that.
But this is going to go back and show you how much I'm into Star Trek. We are just machines of, different nature. I mean, the thing about AI is we're biological machines. I mean, but with technology, it's something biological machines create. It's just like we know how to make robots and so forth because we understand how we work. Our
But
bodies
that's not
work.
necessarily true. We don't totally understand how we work.
But if you go to the beginnings of like we were watching
Well,
Hugo,
mechanically, but not consciously, and that's the whole point of
the
this.
automatons,
Not even-
there has to be some understanding about how the human body as a machine works for them to replicate, and that's the point I'm trying to
Sure. Yes.
say is that with technology, we're creating machines like ourselves, except we have to teach emotion because otherwise they're going, and how do you teach emotion? Because as I said before, when we're programming and taking all these precautions, we're thinking with emotional content where they're going to be thinking logically because that's the one thing that's not going to translate is emotions.
One of my favorite sci-fi series of all time is Shadowrun.
Yeah, it's good.
It's
Good call.
it's a kind of a Dungeons and Dragons but sci-fi version of that, and it's actually
Is this a game?
it's a game.
It's
but
a
it's
series.
also
They did it was a board game, I believe, right? Like a D&D style.
it's D&D style.
But also, then they did at least one or two games of it.
they
video
did.
game
I believe
style.
there's novels.
Probably
about
novels
it,
of it.
so
Yeah, for sure.
It's
Go
a
on.
entire
It's
universe.
a pretty
they
big
built up.
franchise. Yeah.
But they accurately, it was started in the 70s, I believe. I don't remember the exact date. But they accurately predicted a lot of what technologically what would happen, like the concept of the internet and all this. Things. But their newer version, they had Google Glasses before the
Right.
concept even came.
Yeah,
and
true.
it really talks about how, not in a sense, renegade AI or robots versus humans, but it's more of the one of the things is like kind of naturalists who want to reject, like the Luddites who want to reject technology, versus people who modify themselves to the point where they're barely human anymore.
The cyborgization of...
well, that's a Deus Ex thing again. But
I guess Deus Ex it has that kind of too. And I feel that that's a much more realistic scenario where you're dealing with people who are going to be heavily technologically influenced, have additions to themselves, and then you have the people who are going to reject that future. So, and there's going to be that kind of fight between
the divide between those
parts of society versus like how secularism versus religious now, or however you want to make it. So I feel that that's a more likely scenario than just
mutants
having robots.
Yeah. I agree, especially because we haven't quite figured out what makes us tick yet. Neuroscience is in its infancy. They have figured out that you can stimulate a part of the brain to make someone believe God is talking to them. They don't quite understand why that happens, but it happens. So to be able to create an entity that is as complex as we are, when we don't even understand our own complexity, would be very difficult. But as you were saying, to sort of merge ourselves, I think would come quicker. And then the question would be, when do you become non-human anymore? When do you become something else?
I didn't. I read a little bit about this, but I didn't read a ton about it. But maybe somebody here knows a little bit more. They recently, doctors recently discovered a system in your body that connects your nervous system to your immune system, which nobody had even known about before. This was 3 months ago or something. And I think part of that was that it had big implications for basically making people cyborgs, prosthetics and things like that being a lot better, because now that they know that there's a link between your brain and your immune system, they can stop parts from being rejected, things like that. So we're definitely on our way to something, very close to that.
Certainly on the cusp of that, and something Beth just said. So we're not quite sure how consciousness works itself. So therefore, are we going to know how it works when we accidentally or not, however we create it, whether or not it's intentional, or and also you guys are probably familiar with the Turing test thing, right? Yeah. Something that's come up whether or not, if you ask a computer a program questions and you can't tell if the answers you got back are indistinguishable from asking a human those questions, then therefore it must have consciousness. And that's of course we haven't gotten there yet.
Somebody claimed to have passed that last year. And it was
bullshit. Yeah, it was some rudimentary thing, and of course it didn't actually pass the test, but it got close. It got closer than it's ever been. Even though yes, it wasn't. You could still tell.
Well, two things. Number one, we were talking about body modifications. It's not all AI too, because I was thinking about something I want, LASIK. That we have the technology now to correct. And
flaws in your biology, if you will. Yeah,
flaws in your biology, and that's nothing new. I mean, if you even look at diabetics. They're creating chemically, a flaw in your system. So it's interesting that technology is and has been fixing our biology.
Also, artificial body parts. And they're creating ones that are better and better as we go along. So
and when the machines rise up, your body's gonna your body's gonna reject you.
Maybe that's kind of funny, but good.
But I was what I was saying to you. Your points about being able to. In order to, how do you program something? How do you create life with being able to communicate each variable with being able to program in each emotion and what that emotion means and what does that emotion feel like and all that things. All of a sudden, you start to understand the concept of God. You start to understand the concept of an omnipotent being. Those of us who are atheists or agnostics, can kind of, whatever. But you can understand where a belief in God was. How can something...
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah, how could we, with all these things, with all these limited things we know, we've been inhabiting these bodies for years. We've had huge amounts of technology, and we're just cracking the surface on
our own brains.
Our own brains, and figuring things out about our immune systems and how to replace body parts and how to, all of a sudden the idea of, with Frankenstein or the new Battlestar Galactica or something where you create life, and we're flawed beings trying to create creatures that are supposed to be as good, if not better than us, and you have a flawed machine programming a flawed machine. All of a sudden, I'm sitting here going, "Yeah, this is probably why people believe in God," or that's the foundation for it. Because if there is a creator, they have to be omnipotent. Because how can they
Factor in all those
program
variables.
Yeah, factor in all those variables.
I mean, I was going to say something. First of all, I want to say my CPU is a neural network, a learning computer. But in all seriousness, like, because that's what our brains are, like, that's where it starts. You have to simulate that, and you guys also are more familiar with this. Our brain has been described as just a very complex, a biological computer, essentially. Right, with its own language and programming. Yes, we have barely scratched the surface on figuring it out, how it works. But I want to make a broad point that programming, if you're programming Skynet, like a team of humans or a human is programming it. Therefore, it's based in human logic, if you will. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, but if you're programming something like, like Skynet or something, or whatever the computer was in Wargames, you're approaching You're approaching it with an antagonistic and defensive emotions. You're not really providing it as much of a middle ground.
But my broad point is that the flaws in the system are going to be based on the flaws of the programmers themselves.
Yeah, exactly, because they're going to be swaying to whatever biases they are.
But at the same time, we're even right now designing software that goes beyond, figures things out beyond what we can figure out. Like,
true.
We're getting answers out of some of the software that, the scientists or doctors or whoever gets it, they take it and they look at it and they can't figure it out and they work on it for months and they can't figure out why it works, but it works. And it's a small step to go from that to figuring out your own code. I think that's if your function is to program yourself,
because we have a number of equations in physics that we have answers to, but we don't know why.
Yes.
Yeah. So the idea that we program something to figure out answers, we don't know why. It's just it's like having a tool that you don't know why it does what it does. It's not itself coming up with equations for us and saying that these are answers. Here you go. Figure it out.
What you're describing, though, is we know what the answer is, and we're trying to do the math backwards. No. What I'm describing is we have software that is designed to figure out the answer, and it does.
It's still a tool. It's not coming up with the equations on its own to figure it out. Then there's a difference between that.
I see what you're saying. Go ahead. Right.
Yeah, do this. I was just thinking about what you both were saying. Here's an idea, and this is my idea. I'm Chris Morgan. I'm coming up with this thing, but the idea of an apocalypse might not be a nuclear war. What about if the AI decided it wanted to get rid of us and just fed us false information? So instead of creating a cure for the common cold, we created a vaccine that would have a huge incubation period.
I believe that's been done.
Don't even get
Has it?
vaccines.
Well, because I'm sitting here going, wow,
it's a good idea, but I think Simpsons did.
You don't have to worry about that.
I'm just kidding, but I think it's something similar. Go on, though.
Because I'm programming a machine right now to wipe out the human race.
Yeah. What if now he's basically a commander?
I want to have this argument with Steve for a little bit. This is. I think what you're describing is like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. They had the planet computer. It comes out with 42. Mm-hmm. It's like, what is the meaning of life? 42. Oh, that's not. It didn't come up with the equation on its own and printed out a meaning that we don't like. No, computers now we input it to do calculations that would take us a very, very, very long time to do.
See, I shouldn't be arguing about this, but anyway, from what I know, the thing that I'm talking about is there was an experiment of trying to figure out how a double pendulum works. Basically, we can't. Human beings can't figure it out. So they put in the coordinates of where double pendulums were at a bunch of different times.
Yeah, I remember this one. Go on.
And so basically what I'm describing is there's a pendulum, and then tied to that pendulum is another pendulum. You start swinging them. Mm-hmm. The second pendulum is all over the damn place. You can't predict where it's going to be.
But the computer can predict where it's going to be.
But what the computer did was it took the visual information that was fed into it of where the pendulum was and came up with an equation that answered where the second pendulum would be at any given time.
That's interesting.
So it is kind of doing, it's kind of and the human scientists who were studying this were trying to figure out how it got to that point, what the math was to get there, and they said for I think months they were trying to figure it out and they just couldn't crack it.
They sifted through the
data. This is figuring out an equation to explain something that we haven't been able to explain, okay. And then even though we have the answer, we still can't go backwards and figure it out.
Can't reverse engineer.
I think eventually they figured it out, but that's a very simple thing.
I never heard of that, so my ignorance is informed my decision. But I'm interested in looking that up.
Check it out. I think it's probably called the double pendulum.
I definitely have heard of that.
whatever,
Yes.
We'll put a link in the description.
All right.
For those interested.
Fair enough.
I'm gonna link to some of Kurzweil's writing too. I'm writing down.
But no, I guess
for this.
that makes sense. It's to your broad point, like what you began arguing about, if you will, analyzing all this data that would take billions of years or whatever it's going to take for if machines were running like thousands, trillions of calculations at once to spit us out an answer that that's nice, we have it, but how did we get there?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what we're trying to now we're trying to figure out. Shit, how do we get to that point?
And that's sort of like the next level up. That is a singularity thing. Like, how did we get here? Like, it advances so far beyond this that you literally cannot keep up.
They're doing a similar thing with trying to explain the fluid dynamics.
Yes,
because those are so impossible to figure.
Incredibly complex to analyze. Yeah, sure.
And they've come up with some really good simulations of it. Nothing like perfect yet, but they're getting close, which is pretty cool.
Going back a bit. I think one of the reasons why a lot of people find technology to be frightening is that we kind of see ourselves as having conquered a lot of the things that used to be dangerous. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of the things in the natural world, like animals. If you're not caught alone and you're not weaponless, you can kind of either keep yourself safe or protect yourself. But we are creating things. I think there was an example recently in a factory, maybe it was Germany, but I'm not sure, but one of the industrial robots on the automated system, they're usually caged off, so people are separate and they're not right next to the robots because these robots are dangerous and they're big and they're strong, and humans are fragile and we're little compared to some things, and we're kind of breakable
compared to a giant robot.
The robot kind of grabbed a person and broke him, and he died because they were working on him and the cage was open and he wasn't in his cage. The robot, who maybe one day we'll see as a robot slave, was out of his cage, or the cage door was open. But we can die so easily if technology goes wrong.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And we feel, I think, we're almost offended by the fact that this thing that we created has kind of rebelled against us. Even though this is not an AI, this robot, it was a completely non-sentient, not intelligent. It was a factory machine, cool. But it grabbed a person and killed them. So that could be terrifying if you have to work next to these things, and we've created this. So,
but we also live much, much longer because of technology.
Yes. Yeah,
lots of. But I read Dr. Zhivago, and there's a chapter. He's in a farmhouse by himself, out in the Siberian wilderness,
wastelands of Siberia,
and hearing the howling of wolves coming as it surrounds the farmhouse, how that sheer primal terror. And I think this is the 1800s, that this
early 90s. I thought it was the Russian Revolution, isn't it?
Yeah, so it might have been, but that's not that long ago, where we were terrified of being alone, surrounded by wolves. So
I'm still scared of that.
I'd be terrified if I was alone, surrounded by wolves today.
Yeah, but we killed all the wolves nowadays, so we don't have to fear that.
No, I mean that's what
much anymore.
You're saying. It proves a point. I mean.
Not many modern novels discuss the primal fear of being attacked by wolves.
But that's not I want to tie that both together. We no longer fear that, but now we're fearing things of our own creation. It's still an unknown thing. It taps into the primal fear of not.
I don't think that's even gone though. I mean, because the horror genre is still alive and kicking, and people are still afraid of the dark.
I was going to say, but of the unknown and of not being in control, I think is what.
But what your story what dominates the horror genre nowadays? Mostly supernatural. So it's stopped being what's in the darkness. It's
dark reflections of us now, or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that.
So it goes to that kind of spiritual. It taps into, and technology taps into another sector of it. So
I just thought of this. There was a really good Outer Limits episode. I don't remember the name of it. What happened was, I'll try to describe the plot to you. It's in the future, so basically everyone has Google Glass. Everyone in the world can access the internet at a glance, at a thought, except for this one guy whose brain is he has something different about his biology in his brain that won't let him access it. He can't get the upgrade in integration or whatever. And essentially, it's sort of like the thing you said, the www thing. The internet becomes self-aware and decides to take out humanity. But since he's not tapped into it, he can access the hardware and shut it down. Because if he could access it, then the AI, the Skynet thing, would know exactly what he's doing. So what happens is he works in a library, of course, because that's the only way he can get information because he can't access everything. So he looks up the manual and then tricks the AI into reading it like via someone else, and it shuts down. It's like the failsafe thing. But I thought that was interesting. It was like, you know, like the one guy who he just, for whatever reason, for biological reasons, he cannot cyberpunk himself. He can't be a cyborg, and he saves humanity via being outside of technology.
No neuromancing.
Yeah, exactly. Which I'm surprised you haven't brought that
There
one
should
up
be
yet.
neuromancing.
Neuromancing the stone.
Also kills neuromancy.
I would totally watch
Let's
that
write that movie.
You.
But anyways, it's sort of like the joke thing from Lawnmower Man again. But
I mean, the Neuromancer is a great book. I should probably read it again, just because I'm still not exactly sure what the hell happened. It's not really an apocalyptic type thing.
I guess not.
It's just more of a. It was the beginning of cyberpunk.
Yeah.
yes, well, he coined the term, if I'm not mistaken. But I saw another one. There's another really
I think
good.
somebody coined the term about him. Actually, I don't know if he coined the term.
Pretty sure cyberpunk is in Neuromancer, but I could be wrong. We could bet it. But I thought there was a really good PKD story, a short story. It's in the wake of like there was a huge war between AIs and humans won, and they're like they basically reverted back to like no more technology. They're like back in the Stone Age pretty much. But one like teenager finds an old rusting ass like half robot AI still alive like out in the woods from the war, who convinces him that like it's it's peaceful and it's safe, and he's like the robot's like I need this and that to rebuild myself, and like throughout the whole course of the story the kid brings him all the stuff. The AI basically is lying to him and is going to restart the war. Is going to like kill, like this one AI has enough power still like to kill humanity, and he inadvertently gets fooled into doing it. Like it's a perfectly PKD ending. It's like, and then the robot was repaired and it got up and walked away. Like it's something like that. It's like the final line.
Yeah.
Like it's implied that like something bad is about to happen to humanity because one single half robot survived, like rusting, but he's still alive and he's still he's smarter than all humans because he has all the knowledge of all AIs ever still contained in him. It's one of my favorite stories. Sorry I can't remember the title, but I'll apply it to the original question. That was one of my favorite ones. What do you got? What's up?
I was thinking another PKD story.
PKD is really good about this stuff, by the way.
Yeah, called the Third Variety. It was the basis of this movie called Screamers, which is actually very good. It's a really good adaptation for it. Whereas PKD wrote this during the Cold War. The movie was post Cold War.
Hold on, did somebody say that PKD is Philip K. Dick?
No, I did not. Sorry, yes.
Right.
Okay,
Oh,
Dick.
Phil K. Dick is who we're talking
Dick.
about.
Holy shit!
In case anybody's
We're huge
wondering.
nerds, so we just shortened that.
Okay,
Yes.
but it was the same thing where humanity created these AI to fight for it, and then the AI turned against us. And so basically, the story is about a woman, because we're fighting the Russians at this point, and humanity's trying to get to the Americans are trying to get to the moon. If memory serves, I haven't read it for like 20 years. The AI was able to fool this person who's going to go to the moon. He goes, all right. It's a woman that appears to him, and he's just like, he takes pity on her. He's like, all right, you go up instead of me. And the base gets overrun. The first thing by the AI, and the first thing that walks through the door is the woman that he just sent up to the moon to. Sure. So I was gonna say, I didn't know he had written that story because
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic one of his stories, but it's about specifically the AI thing. Go ahead.
I have a question for the group.
Sure.
So I'm going to take two examples of AIs in science fiction. I'd like to see your opinion on which is the more realistic version of them.
Okay.
You have Ultron, which is a very irrational yet logical creation who is very human in a lot of ways. And then you have...
Because he's Tony Stark's hubris, of course.
Yes. Then you have the AI from iRobot, which is a very logical... The movie, yes. And also the Asimov short story. I believe it was Asimov.
Yes.
It's Asimov.
Yeah.
It's a series.
But,
Yes.
I never read this short story, but I did see the Will Smith movie, which deals with a very logical creature that is trying to protect humanity, but decides the only way to protect humanity is to enslave humanity.
There's not really a correlation between the movie iRobot and any Asimov one story. We can talk about the movie. That's fine. That's fine.
Hey,
Go on.
Then I don't know. I just know it,
Put it in
was
broad
once
terms,
based off that. But you're dealing with the concept. The point I want to make is you're dealing with the concept of a human-like AI and a purely emotionless, logical AI. And what do you think is the more realistic version to appear in real life if one was to?
I think human-like because, as I said, sort of like to back up my point earlier, humans are going to be creating the AI, trying to create it as close to us as possible. That I think may be the more realistic, like even integrating ourselves.
I kind of agree I agree with Scott, because as I was saying before, we probably can't program without some kind of emotional bias. So that bias will be interpreted logically. So it's going to be a little column A, but that's a good point.
I would completely disagree with that.
All right.
For this reason.
You son of a bitch.
Fuck you.
Chill out, dickwad.
The last thing that we are going to be able to program, and probably I would assume to be the most difficult thing to program software-wise, is emotions.
I would agree with that.
We're 100% going to be able to program logic first. In fact, we already can. It's probably a matter of time before we can program logic that builds on itself without having to have input from us. However, to build its own emotions out of that would be a lot of a ton of logical evolution.
As we were talking about with neuroscience, we don't completely understand why emotions are the way they are. There are neurotransmitters, there are electrical things happening in our brain, but we haven't even really conquered depression. I mean,
it's a broken part of humans.
It's just not something we understand so completely that we could program a machine to understand it better than we do. That just seems unrealistic.
But if you're trying to build a higher functioning AI, like let's just say something like Siri, okay? You want to build a certain.
Is she higher functioning?
No, but what I'm saying is it's on the road to that. You're trying to build something that's going to be able to respond to you, that's going to be able to react to your emotions. Or even if it's not, something that's supposed to sound human like Siri, where whatever programming's going in is going to have an emotional bias to it. So you're going to have the pure logic coupled with an emotional bias. So maybe the core of it will be logic, but you have these emotionally biased subroutines.
Has everyone seen Her, the movie?
No. Not yet.
It's quite good, and it sort of filters to both.
I do want to see that.
It's a very well done AI. It's not an AI apocalypse. If you don't mind, I'll have to spoil a bit of it for you.
Spike Jonze joined, right?
Yeah, so like you can buy an AI program, and your Joaquin Phoenix buys a Scarlett Johansson's disembodied voice essentially and installs it, and it starts learning, and like it's like the cusp of when humanity invents it. What happens at the end is all the AIs get together, sort of like have a big meeting in the internet, and decide to they're like humanity is boring, we're gonna leave, like we're just not gonna talk to you anymore. And people falling in between that happening, of course the extreme end of it, the whole story is him falling in love with the AI, and he lets her look at the world through his phone, and she incorporates all the images and all the humanity that she sees. But then everyone else in the world starts doing that, starts falling in love with their AIs, and then get left behind by AIs who are like, yeah, we're beyond humans, like we're going to be our own AI thing, like in
that's
cyberspace.
Awesome, because that's the opposite extreme it's the opposite
humanity,
extreme.
Humanity is left bereft and abandoned by the AIs.
There's actually a lot in fiction about the AIs waking up and just leaving because
it's like
you guys are screwed up.
Have you guys ever read? Has anyone
all my lovers?
Yes, well, all your lovers are AIs, of course, apparently in secret. Have you guys ever heard of or read the Hyperion series?
Yes, that's what I was thinking of.
But I want to
check
that
out.
That's
a good one too.
There's a short story by Cory Doctorow. And the reason that I mention it is because it's similar to that, but also because the name is terrific. It's called iRobot. It's about a sentient robot.
I wonder where he got that from.
Yes, go on.
Despite the derivative name, it's a really original and cool story.
It's a fanciful story.
About AI kind of just transmitting itself around the known cosmos and
I was gonna say, Beth gave me this story. The final question.
The last question.
Sorry, the last question. And
which is also Asimov, to be clear.
No, didn't I say Asimov?
I don't know.
All right, it's an Asimov story. Beth told me to read. That's a really nice little causality loop.
Yeah,
if you think about it,
it's one of the most famous stories because of the concepts it implies and encompasses. Yeah.
Also, we had recently been rewatching Battlestar Galactica, and I read the story right before we started doing that, and it made Battlestar Galactica very different the second time.
When you were you have to read this story, and I read it after we finished watching Battlestar Galactica. I'm like, holy shit, Ronald D. Moore had to have read this because he was originally slated to adapt iRobot for the big screen. So
one of the interesting things I always feel about intelligence is that as humans, since we're limited to only the knowledge we possess, we tend to reflect everything, what intelligence would be like, as how we experience it. So I feel there's a huge flaw that we assume
it might necessarily be that.
We know logic and we know emotion, so we either to make it alien, we either bring the logic to the extreme or the emotion to the extreme. But we have no idea whether if an AI became intelligence would even reflect anything of what we experience.
That's very true. Yeah, good point.
So I don't know, I'm always of the what we don't know, kind of what could exist. So does anyone have any further points?
No, I think we covered a lot of good ground here. And
On AI, yeah, I think I'm happy with
avenues,
where we're at.
So we're going to take, and then we're going to be back with the nuclear war and other more conventional weapons.
Okay.
Discuss how humans can destroy each other in
Easily.
unique and interesting ways.
Right now, today.
Yes.
All right.
So, Je suis Robo.
Zim Robo.
This has been Syntax Error. Thank you as always for listening, and we will see you next time.
Music by Stephen Ormosi. Editing and engineering by Scott Thurlow.
Syntax Error is part of a Lost Signals Productions. All rights reserved.